There is a certain kind of person who lives a double life, not in the way of lies or secrets, but in the way that their inside world and their outside world look almost nothing alike. On the outside, calm, composed, maybe even a little distant. They smile at the right moments, they say the right things. If you looked at them from across the room, you might even think that person has it together. But inside, a completely different storm is happening. They felt the tension in the room the moment they walked in. They noticed the slight coldness in your voice when you said, "I'm fine." They caught the way your eyes moved a half second too late. And right now, while they're nodding and looking completely normal, their chest is carrying about 11 different emotions they have no idea what to do with. These people are not cold. They are not numb. They are not unfeeling robots. They are, in fact, the most intensely feeling people in any room. They just never learned how to show it. And today, we are going to go deep into the psychology of this quiet, emotional world, why it forms, what it does to a person over time, and most importantly, why feeling everything while showing nothing is one of the heaviest things a human being can carry. Stay until the end, because the last thing I'm going to share is the one shift that changes everything for people like this. And it's probably not what you think. To understand why someone becomes this way, we have to go back. Almost always back to childhood. Think about a child who grew up in a home where emotions were not safe to express. Maybe their sadness was met with, "Stop crying, you're being dramatic." Maybe their anger was punished immediately, so they learned to swallow it fast. Maybe they had a parent who was emotionally fragile themselves, and that child instinctively understood, if I show how I feel, it will make things worse. So that child learned something extremely early. Feeling is okay, showing is dangerous. Psychologists call this emotional suppression conditioning. When a person's environment repeatedly teaches them that emotional expression leads to negative consequences, and the brain, which is designed above all else for survival, adapts. It builds walls, not out of coldness, but out of protection. The child develops what researchers call a high affect intensity. They actually feel emotions more deeply than average, combined with an extremely powerful display rule suppression system, the internal filter that blocks emotion from reaching the surface. In other words, they feel more, they show less. And here is the cruelest part. By the time they become an adult, they no longer choose to suppress. It happens automatically. The wall between their inner world and their outer face is no longer a decision, it's a reflex, an old survival program still running in the background long after the danger is past. They walk into a job interview feeling waves of anxiety, and their face shows nothing. They receive devastating news, and their voice stays steady. They fall in love so deeply it scares them, and they say, "Yeah, it's going well," with a small shrug. The world sees composure, but inside a universe is spinning. Here is one of the most distinct signs of someone who feels everything but shows nothing. In the moment, they handle it. A conflict at work, they stay professional. A painful comment from someone they love, they nod and change the subject. A shocking piece of news, they go quiet, say okay, and keep moving. But then, 3 hours later, or 3 days later, it hits, alone in the shower, driving home in silence, lying in bed at midnight, staring at the ceiling. The emotion they couldn't feel in the moment arrives in full force, like a wave they dodged earlier has finally caught up with them. Psychology calls this delayed emotional processing. The prefrontal cortex, the brain's rational controlling layer, has been so thoroughly trained to take charge in emotional moments that it overrides the limbic system, the emotional brain, in real time. But emotions are not logic. They cannot simply be canceled. They get stored, compressed, filed away, and they come out later. Sometimes as a crying episode with no clear trigger, sometimes as a sudden, heavy tiredness that has no obvious cause, sometimes as a quiet anger that settles in the chest and refuses to leave. People in their lives often don't understand this. You seemed fine at the time. Why are you upset now? But that's the thing. They weren't fine. They were processing on delay. They were running an emotional queue that the world never sees. Here is the quiet irony at the center of this personality. The person who feels everything but shows nothing. They become the person everyone else comes to, because when you are in pain, you don't want someone who panics. You don't want someone who cries harder than you or who immediately jumps to fixing things. You want someone steady, someone who can sit inside the storm of your emotion without being swept away. And that is exactly what these people offer. Their own emotional suppression, and the very thing that isolates them makes them an extraordinary container for other people's pain. They know how to hold space, they know how to stay calm, they know the exact right silence to offer. But here is what no one sees. After you leave, after they've absorbed your tears, your fear, your grief, they sit alone with all of it still inside them. They have taken on your emotion, but they have nowhere to put their own, because the same wall that makes them steady for you and keeps them silent with themselves. Psychologists call this asymmetric emotional labor, giving emotional support consistently without receiving it in return. Not because people don't care, but because no one thinks to offer it. Why would they? They always seem fine. And so these people move through the world as pillars for everyone around them, while quietly, invisibly, carrying more than anyone around them ever knows. Ask them what they need, and they will probably say, "I'm fine, don't worry about it." Not because they don't need anything, but because asking for help requires something they were never taught to do safely. It requires showing vulnerability. It requires letting someone see the inside world. And the inside world has been private for so long that even opening the door a crack feels like an enormous risk. There is a specific psychological pattern behind this called self-reliance as identity. When a person grows up learning that emotional expression is not safe, they don't just suppress emotion, they build an entire identity around not needing others. I handle things myself. I don't burden people. I am the strong one. This identity becomes their armor. And after wearing armor for long enough, you forget what you look like without it. So when someone finally says, "Hey, are you okay? You can talk to me," something in them wants to, desperately, but a louder voice immediately says, "Don't. Stay composed. You'll be too much. They won't understand." And so they smile and they say, "I'm okay, really." And another moment of possible connection quietly closes. Here is where the science becomes impossible to ignore. Emotions that are consistently suppressed do not disappear. They go somewhere. Research in psychosomatic medicine has consistently found that chronic emotional suppression is linked to physical symptoms. Chronic tension in the neck and shoulders, jaw clenching, digestive issues, persistent fatigue, headaches with no clear medical cause. The body keeps a record that the face refuses to show. There is a concept in neuroscience called somatic memory, the way the nervous system stores unprocessed emotional experience as physical sensation. For someone who feels everything but shows nothing, their body is essentially a storage unit for decades of unfelt, unexpressed emotion, and they might not even be able to name what they feel at any given moment. If you ask them, they'll say, "I don't know. I just feel heavy." That heaviness is real. It has a location, usually the chest or somewhere behind the eyes. It has a weight, sometimes barely noticeable, sometimes almost unbearable. And the exhausting truth is, they've learned to live with it so well that they barely notice it anymore. It has simply become the background of their existence. Here is what this life costs over time. Relationships that stay beautiful but never go deep, because depth requires visibility, and visibility requires risk. A growing loneliness not from lack of company, but from a feeling of being permanently unseen. Not because the people around them are blind, but because they have become too skilled at being invisible. And sometimes, after years of holding it all in, something small breaks the wall. Not a dramatic crisis, not a breakdown, something small, a song that catches them off guard, a stranger's unexpected kindness, a quiet Tuesday afternoon with nothing to distract them. And suddenly, the full weight of everything they've ever felt but never shown is right there, in their throat, behind their eyes, and for one terrifying and beautiful moment, it wants out. These moments are not weakness. These are the moments where healing tries to begin. Psychology tells us that emotional expression, even when private, even when just writing it down, even when said only to oneself, activates the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, reducing the intensity of the emotional signal in the amygdala. In plain language, naming and expressing an emotion, even quietly, makes it smaller. The wall doesn't need to come down all at once, it just needs a door. People who learn to live with more openness, without losing their depth or their composure, usually move through three quiet realizations. First, they realize that composure and expression are not opposites. You can be steady and say, I'm struggling right now. You can be calm and let someone see the weight you're carrying. Strength is not silence. Real strength is honesty that doesn't flinch. Second, they find one or two people who can handle their real interior. Not everyone deserves access to the inside world, but the search for those one or two people and the ones who can sit with the real version of you, that search is worth everything. Third, they begin to let their body speak before their mind edits it. A deep breath when they feel something, a hand on the chest when emotion arrives, a moment of pause instead of immediate management, small signals, small permissions. But over time, the inside world and outside world begin to close the gap. They still feel everything, but slowly, carefully, they begin to show a little more of it. And for the first time, instead of being seen as composed, they start being seen as real. That is not weakness. That is one of the hardest and most courageous things a human being can do. If you recognized yourself in any part of this video, I want you to know something. The depth you carry, the capacity to feel so intensely while still holding yourself together, that is not a flaw that needs fixing. It is a kind of strength that the world rarely acknowledges because it is invisible by design. But I see it, and now hopefully you see it too. Leave a comment and tell me which part of this felt most like your own story. Was it the delayed emotions, the exhaustion of being everyone's anchor, the body that holds what the face won't show? You are not alone in this. If this video helped you feel even slightly more understood today, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes the most healing thing in the world is simply realizing there is a name for what I carry, and I am not the only one. I'm Apex. Be gentle with yourself today. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. I'll see you there.